we're going to turn first to Séverine Dusollier, who will do a presentation of a work in progress that she's just working on now. So I think she'll very much appreciate your comments. And Séverine is a professor of law at Sciences Po Law School, and she will be presenting on her work, Ecologies of Open Access. Séverine, it's great to have you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Sean, and I'd like to start by really thanking you for this amazing opportunity to discussing my work with such scholars that are amazing, and I follow their work and I'm influenced by their work. So thank you, Duncan, Caris, and Peter for taking the time to do this with us. So my point today would be to actually not criticize open access, but having a critical look at it. And I shared a few articles with Sean in preparation of this talk, and the one he picked up for you to read is an old article that I wrote in 2003, and it was called The Master Tools versus the Master House. So it was at the very early beginning of Creative Commons license, so it might have been a bit too early to develop a critique of those licenses. And at the time, I was really not opposed to the development of those licenses. I was pretty much involved in it. I was Creative Commons license person for Belgium, so I was really promoting them. But at the same time, I was also looking at the tension and what the impact those licenses could have in some cases. And I was pretty much involved with some people in Belgium and some artists who were also using those tools very enthusiastically, but also a bit cautious about how those licenses would be regulating their practices. The two critique that I had at the time, and that I still have today, even if open access environment has evolved, is the first one is that I think that the ideology of open access at its very beginning was really grounded in the objective to ensure access to a work considered as a free object to extract value from. So it might not have been as clear as it is now for me, but in this first article, I really wanted to point out the fact that, for instance, Laurence Lessig, when he wrote about free culture and free access, it was really about the users getting what he needs and getting access to a work without any prohibition, without any obstacle. But he was not really looking at what the authors could gain from open access licensing. So that was my first critique. The second critique came from a feminist reading of IP, that I think the open access construction still is very much attached to the idea of an individualized author that has the privilege to open her creation to the world in a very colonial gesture, and that open access licensing actually doesn't really care about the past of the creation, of the collective inspiration and all the relational aspects of the creation and of the collaboration. And I think that this is a key point of my talk today, is that open access, in some cases where it might be very much relevant, does not care about who is in and who is left out. And this is what I'm interested in too. So this is maybe where my thinking might be close to a critical standpoint of critical legal studies, even though at the time of this article, I didn't know nothing about critical legal studies, and I should confess. But I think that today, the open access movement is evolved to such a way that it has even exacerbated its critique. So again, my point is not to oppose to openness in IP. I think it is really, really interesting tool in IP to open up IP and also to defeat some of its expansion and its excessive exclusion. But it has also been recaptured in a way by the industry and the economy, the capitalist economy tried to defeat in the first place. And this is why we should be very cautious about how we actually develop open access and how and when and where. My first point is that actually for me, in some cases, the mandate of putting something as open in a copyleft license could be also transforming the knowledge into a commodity, as much as copyright could do that. And you could see in the article by Caris, that is a great piece of work, that you know, the copyright does do that, and IP does do that by its tool of property and authorship. It really transforms knowledge into marketable assets that can be traded in the market. And I think that sometimes open has the same function, even if it's true open and to allowing everyone to use. It also takes the knowledge as an object and it just put it in an off switch, if you wish, but it doesn't care much about anything else, about the environment in which it takes place and about the impact of this object and the access and the use of this object for other users, for creators, for the community as a whole. So my point is to develop a sort of another vision of open access that would be more ecological. And by ecology, I really mean to take care of the relational approach and to consider the condition and practice of open access and of creation. Because for me, I think that imposing openness without paying attention to these conditions and practices of creation and to the inequalities and asymmetries of power between creators and users of works would be a mistake. And I think that then the open access would just be another product on the market that would have its value, that could be extracted and that could reproduce further knowledge, further creation, but without any look at its overall impact. My thinking is very much informed by some scholars who are, most of them are not lawyers actually. They have formed what they call a radical open access movement, where they're really trying to look again at open access and see how it is also developing a specific geopolitic and how it really influences the way people are creating science knowledge works. And there are also other scholars, the Open and Collaborative Science in Development Network, which is a group of scholars, including a lot of scholars from the Global South, that are actually trying to look at the principle and practice in open science from what they call a situated openness. And they do that in reference to the situated knowledge of Donna Haraway. So I think it's really interesting to see how actually we cannot just think of open access in the abstract, because thinking it in the abstract means actually that we're thinking it from our point of view in the Western developed innovation-based world. And I think that we should also situate ourselves and see that the open access that we're promoting is not completely neutral in its effect. So actually such situated openness joins my concept of ecologies, I think, because it implies that you cannot really impose open access to resources, to intangible knowledge, without situating that in the communities and in the environment that have created and nourished that knowledge. When I started this critique of open access in the early 2000s, I was working with some collective of artists. They were really criticizing copyright. There was this week of conference that was called CopyCult, and it was really interesting because at the same time they were really experimenting the first open access license for creators. It was even before Creative Commons. It was called the Free Art License. And they were also looking at how people were creating. And I was involved in this project that was called Cuisine Interne in French. Cuisine Interne, it's your own business, if you mean, but it's also the kitchen, you know, where you work. And they were actually interviewing a lot of artists, and they were asking them very simple questions such as, where do you work? In which room of your apartment? At what time? Do you have your kids around or not? Can you work for a whole day, or do you have to go outside and work for a living and then work on your creation afterward? There were a lot of women in the people they interviewed, so it was also intersecting with, you know, the room of one's home of Wolf, that in which room are you really creating? And so the event was really crossing these two things, the fact that we want to open our creation to the world, but at the same time as artists, we are really stuck with some basic practical condition of living that make us want to have a living, and that copyright doesn't give us that living. So we prefer the art libre license. And so I was really at the time puzzled by that, because I thought that it couldn't be separated, it couldn't be dissociated. And if the free art license or the Creative Commons license was only a way for the users to get access to what they want, when they want, and at no cost, then we would miss, you know, what we really want as a free culture. So that was my starting point. So the first one is actually scientific publications, and the fact that we are now, all of us, we are now under mandate of putting our works into open access schemes, which I think is really, really important. And all of us as scholars, as scientists, we want our writings to be read as much as possible and to be distributed. So we were really happy with the development of this open access scheme in scientific publication, because it really enabled us to get out of this scientific publishing economy that is one of the most outrageous economy that I know. And we wanted also, you know, that the model where actually the access to the scientific publication was really a cost for readers, for libraries, for scientific publication to end. And actually open access promised to be a way to get out of this system and to try to really make the science available to all. I'm a bit disappointed by what it has become, because of course we know nowadays that publishing on open access mostly requires the author to pay. And so we have an author pay model now where the author has to pay some APC, so article processing charge, that can go up to thousands of dollars. So actually the cost has shifted from the readers to the authors, but it hasn't really reduced the benefits of the scientific publishers. And at the same time, the scientific publishers have continued and developed an extractive model where they really extract a lot of research data from SSRN, academia, etc. So actually they have gained a lot of benefit, and the authors have lost, I think, a lot. I put a quote here from Sarah Kember, who is a scholar but also a publisher of Goldsmith Press, who tries to think the ethics of publication, and she has written a lot of interesting things on this fact of deferring the cost of open access, of the access to scientific research from the readers to the authors. If we don't pay attention to this, it means that actually a lot of researchers out there will not be able to participate, because early career researchers from university that are less prestigious, who they don't have a lot of financial possibilities, or researchers from the global south, or researchers writing in less spoken language, or women who are also, and there are studies on that, who have also less money to spend on open access, will not be able to pay the cost required to put their works in open access. And it means that their scientific voices will not be heard. So I don't think this is really what we want, and we should really pay attention to other sustainable models of open access that could provide an alternative to the commercially based open access that we know today, and could ensure some equality between the researchers and really genuine sharing, whatever the background or economic capacity. Another case of open access that might be disputed is borrowed from a statement that was written a few years ago by Mathilde Pavis and Andrea Wallace, two researchers from Exeter University. And they had actually do something that was really unexpected at the time. There was this report commissioned by the French government, the Sars-Savoie report, on the restitution on African cultural heritage to their communities of origins and country of origin. And this report was really revolutionary, because it really recommended that everything that was taken from those countries would be restituted. But in that report, they also said that before the restitution, all the artifacts that would be restituted would be digitized, and that digital copy would be put in open access, and it would create this type of universal digital museum that would be perfect for all the countries in the world. And actually Mathilde and Andrea made that statement saying, wait a minute, it's not that easy, because what you propose to do is actually making a copy, and that copy is not neutral. So that copy also has a meaning, and making this process of reproduction is not something that the institution that hosts the artifact is entitled to decide. The only person entitled to decide whether we could make this copy is the communities of origin, because the process of reproduction might have a spiritual meaning and symbolic meaning, might be linked with some restriction, etc. And you cannot just make the copy as it is just a neutral technical act, and you should be very cautious. It actually reminds what Anupam Chandra and Madhavi Sundar wrote a long time ago, again, in the Romance of the Public Domain, where they really cautioned against an approach of the public domain, saying that some information should be kept free, and it would be very important to sustain it and to protect it. But actually, Anupam Chandra and Madhavi Sundar in this article, and I will quote them, they really insist on the fact that scholars obscure the distributional consequence of the commons. They presume a landscape where every person can reap the riches found in the commons. This is the romance of the commons, the belief that because of resources open to all by force of law, it will indeed be equally exploited by all. In practice, however, differing circumstances, including knowledge, wealth, power, access, and ability, renders some better able than others to exploit the commons. Just as the trope of the romantic author has served to bolster the property rights claims of the powerful, so too does the romance of the public domain. Resourcefully, the romantic public domain trope steps in exactly where the romantic authors falters, where genius cannot justify the property claims of corporations because the knowledge pre-exists individual claims of authorship. The public domain can. And I think that this critique is very much relevant today for open access and this case of digitization of cultural artifacts that should be restituted and on which the museum and the cultural institution of the global north has no right. The fact that you could digitize them and then recapture some right in this digital copies, even though you put them in open access, is just a reiteration of this colonial gesture that was done in the first place with the artifact itself. So we should be very careful here to really look at who is impacted by those decisions of open access. So actually, what would be the alternative? So it's not easy. So the alternative is not to replace open access by something else. Of course, open access is still needed, and it's still very important to apply it where it can be applied and where, but it's just to apply it with some conscience and to really look at this environment and this ecology that I called for. But we can also look at different new initiatives in open access, new type of licensing that really try to take stock of what went wrong with the existing copyleft licensing and trying to do it better, not to do it better, but to do it differently. So I actually would like to talk to you about this new initiative. This is a license, a draft of a license that has been elaborated in a few months ago by a few friends of mine, and it's called the CC4R, the Collective Conditions for Reuse, and it's called also the Copyleft Attitude with a Difference. It was also done by artists and digital activists, and they have been experimenting with Creative Commons license and other types of license for 20 years, so they know really what they're talking about, and they are always a bit frustrated by the fact that the existing license actually still maintain this very modern idea of an individual author, that just benefit from his or her copyright and reverse the power granting to him by property to open their creation. And they think that actually the Creative Commons license, other license, do not really provide a solution or an accompaniment to acknowledge the different kinds of contribution or to recognize all the entangled relationship that take place between the many persons contributing to the creation. So the Creative Commons license really don't care a lot about the conditions of creation, you know. So the relational aspects of creative practices and the past also creation, so all the material from which this creation takes inspiration is not just in the picture, it's just not there. So this attempt for a license try to focus instead on practices of creation and on relationship. Actually, it's not a license because they don't like that word to begin with. You know, the word of a license that I authorized you, that is really a sort of unidimensional legal relationship. They really try to say, this is not a license, this is conditions, and those conditions are collective. So first it says that the work that is released under those conditions was never yours to begin with, you know, and this condition consider authorship to be part of a collective cultural efforts and reject authorship as ownership derived from individual genius. So it's really, really a stance against copyright as we know it. And so they continue by saying that this means to recognize that it is situated in social and historical condition and that there may be reasons to refrain from release and reuse. So they have really looked at how, in some cases, the reuse should not be allowed. So it's not like Creative Commons license with all types of reuse, if they are in the conditions for the license is authorized. It's just that in some cases you need to take responsibility as a user and you need to refrain from reusing the work if you think that your reuse might be contravening to the creation in which it was done and it was put into the open license or the open condition. What I think is interesting in those type of initiative and attempts is that it has really what I call this ecological perspective, because they really experiment open access, but they don't order it. They don't impose the open access. You know, they really see openness and reuse as a practice, as a collective practice, a collective endeavor. And it's not about giving you rights, but it is about making you belonging to a community and take responsibility for your contribution and for your reuse. I think for me, it's really closer to what I think is a good notion of a commons. So the commons, that is a practice, that is not a noun, but a verb. And it is really, really about, you know, not the creation as an object, but has a relation that creates and maintains a community. So I think that this is what we should look at if we want to expand our notion of openness and making it more lively for the future.